Hello.
Hey there.
Howdy.
Like, we didn't have the notes colonized ahead of time here.
Yeah, Tyler is out today, and I forgot that I had agreed to take over, and I'm being a bad maintainer and haven't become prepared. So let's fill in these notes as we go. We can
try to help out here.
If anybody has anything to add to the agenda, please do so. I think our project board is looking pretty good. We are currently at, if I'm not mistaken, 2 issues in to do. Still probably the same 2 that were there yesterday or last week. Actually, let me see if I can break this out and share my screen so everybody can follow along. That will probably be helpful. I want to share this. Excellent. I need to bring this over as well. Okay, so we have 3 to do. Great, we've gained 1. We are 2 in progress. 9 minus 1, excellent. And we are up to 291 done. So that is plus 9. Excellent. And we've landed some of the significant work that was outstanding. I think the Unify configuration and initialization, Robert, this PR, if I'm not mistaken, is largely ready to go. There were a couple of packages. Sorry, let's go to the, oh, there's not a PR linked.
It will be on the bottom.
Yeah, we can find it this way. So there were a couple of packages you mentioned that were going to require trace and metric that are used externally and would require some more refactoring. Do you think that that's something that we will be able to do before 1.0, or are these different enough, being the top level APIs where the options are used externally, that they're worth having distinct styles for?
So maybe question, what is like your preferred 1.0 release? Do you have any expectation? Because I can work on that. The only problem is that next week I'll be probably fully working on .NET instrumentation side.
Okay. I think my preferred 1.0 release was about 1.5 years ago, but we'll deal with what we've got. I would really like to have an RC available next week. I think that's a realistic goal if we can get this finished up.
So maybe you can open the project and maybe I'll just show what's the issue. So you will have some insight if it's critical in your opinion or not.
In terms of the code for those packages?
Yeah, these 2.
Sure. So let's look at trace config, because that's the one that needs to get to 1.0. So metrics config, we can kind of defer, I think, because we won't be calling the metrics package table.
Yeah. But basically it's very similar. I was looking at this one. So basically this tracer config is exported, as you can see, as well as the new tracer config. And the thing is that, you know, whatever will be used, even using this with, I think it was called with instrumentation version option, it can be changed generally, because you still can have access to this config. And there are some, and there is some stuff which is already calling this new config, new tracer config function. So basically, initially, I started encapsulating some stuff. Like I have unexported the string. I have created a getter for it. But after like 30 minutes, I told myself, no, it's too much. It's better to create a separate PR because it will be just a can of worms.
Okay.
I will actually have a little bit of time to work on this next week.
Could you repeat?
Okay.
You can work on it, right?
Yeah, I can take it over. If it's just the tracer config, and I maybe have the second, I'll maybe have the second one for the metrics config if it's similar.
It's similar. It's like symmetric.
Okay. And then the tracer option, we can apply the same changes to, though, right? Is anything using nothing should be using the methods out of here, so we should be able to make these unexported and remove private, as was done with all the rest, and apply that to all of the different option types that are.
Yeah, I'll go through all of them. If
Okay.
you want to assign it, whatever's left over on that to me. Is there PRs already merged for anything, or either
There
out
is-
or already merged for? the
There
rest
is
of them?
one PR out. I don't think it has been merged because I'm the only one who's approved it yet. It just went ready for review this morning.
Okay.
So if anybody with the approval bit can review that and give it a look, it's if you look at this, it's a lot of the same stuff you would expect to see.
A lot of churn with the apply and
Yeah,
Got it.
changing things that were just functions into interfaces, or changing interfaces that had an export and apply to unexport them, that sort of thing. So it should be a fairly straightforward review. And then let's see, the other outstanding issue we have in progress is the removing the metrics dependency from the Otlp exporter. Gustavo, do you have an update on where we're at with that?
Yeah, I have been working on that, and I think I am almost done with that. There is still things that I need to do, like create modules for the proto repository, and also I'm concerned about how we can get this PR open, because as it is now, it contains like 9,000 of changes, and that's going to be hard to review. I guess I will need to split that. I just not sure how I should split these PRs.
Okay, so I think, excuse me, I think before we had talked about your approach was going to be, let me open this in a tab. Your approach was going to be to structure separate modules with metrics and trace transport types, and then individual exporters as well. That's still the approach that you've taken.
I have changed it a little bit.
Okay.
I have actually removed these protocols folders at all. Let me see if I can like share
Sure.
my screen. I think that could help. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I actually create two folders here, Otlp metric and Otlp trace. And inside that, there's the Otlp trace Grpc and the Otlp trace HTTP. I guess that was the most organized way I could think of, and I changed the signal to be first, so not Otlp Grpc trace, as I don't actually remember who suggested that, but
Gustavo, I have one question, because I
Yeah.
was touching this code like today,
Mhm.
you know, because of the config changes. I was thinking, of course, you know, it's just a little idea, if it may not be easier just to merge those packages like Otlp trace HTTP, Otlp Grpc, and internal into just the Otlp trace, because basically there are a lot of like hacky ways that this code in the internal package is reused, and it's still one module, right?
Yeah.
It was supposed to be separate modules. I thing, because I
Yes.
thought part of the goal was to keep the gRPC dependency
Okay, so
out
right
for
now
people
it
who
will
didn't
be-
want to use it.
I see.
Uh,
So I see now. So the
in-
internal
in-
will be a package as well.
Yes. Actually, that doesn't need to
Module.
be.
So I think OTLP trace in this would be a module that has the internal
Yeah.
package.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I think it might be problematic to use from outside if it will be internal. I don't know if it will compile.
So my recollection of the internal access rules is that as long as
It's the path.
the package is under the folder or the directory that contains internal, it can access it. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's changed with the addition of modules and if
I'm not
modules
sure.
provide an additional bound.
Yeah,
But that's obviously something that should be fairly easy to prove one way or the other.
Yep.
Yeah. That's actually working. So I guess that's the
Yeah,
only.
if this is working, then it must work that way.
But it's working right now because you have the replaces, right? It's better to be checked outside.
Yeah, sure. I will try that as well.
Probably it will, but just to be sure.
Mhm.
So the
Uh,
one thing I would note about this is that there seems to be a lot of repetition in the path. We've got OTLP, OTLP trace, OTLP trace gRPC.
Yeah.
Could that be OTLP / trace / gRPC?
Wouldn't that start overlapping with all the other trace packages that we have?
Yeah.
I agree with Aaron.
The last part of the name is what would create overlap, which would be just gRPC in that model, which would then shadow everything or conflict with everything gRPC. Yeah.
But you would also need the trace to configure the trace portion of the OTLP driver. Like you need to import the driver and then
Right. Okay.
Like you need to, like you have to end up importing all of them. I've actually been kind of thinking on configuring.
This is just because I remember we talked about this months ago, but we know that people could rename their imports, but I think we're saying we don't want to force them to have to. Is that why we're choosing these names?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a little weird that if we know that they're always going to be imported together, it makes me wonder, do they all need to be separate packages also?
But they're not necessarily all going to be imported together, right? So like OTLP trace and OTLP trace gRPC might be imported together, and OTLP trace and OTLP trace HTTP might be imported together, but gRPC and HTTP won't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or trace might be imported, but metrics won't. It feels a little weird, but I understand the rationale now, and yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, it feels a little weird, but it would be very like you would always have to import to configure both trace and metrics gRPC. You would have to import gRPC twice. You'd have to import trace and metrics twice, and you'd probably also import the API level trace and metrics so that you're doing that, as well as maybe even the SDK trace and metrics. And then on top of that, you'll also import OTLP to create the overall OTLP driver. Yeah, it gets fun very fast.
Yeah, I do still feel like we just kind of dump this mess at the user's feet and then ask them to figure out how to put it together again. I understand there's lots of parts that you could put together in different arrangements depending on your needs.
So I mean, I think that's an interesting point, and I think it's an important one to kind of think about the usability of this. It needs to be balanced as well. Something that wasn't also said was just like people were saying that you're probably going to not use packages together, but like one of the important parts that we're doing here is to keep in mind that like we're trying to isolate versioning. So like the metrics and trace stuff is not going to be in lockstep, and it's going to have stability, just incongruity there, as well as logs whenever that shows up. And the other side is dependencies, right? So the HTTP driver does not have the same dependencies as the gRPC one. And the other side to like having users say like, well, we're going to give you the Cadillac solution that has everything already installed is, well, that also is going to be like massively bloated for things you don't actually need for, a telemetry library, right? Like this is like one of the things that we're trying to also do is provide a minimal set and to try to have a lightweight overhead on anybody who includes these dependencies in the project. That being said, like that's a good point. I know that at like Splunk and when I was working at New Relic as well, like these kinds of pain points are things that like we solve or try to solve for the user is try to like cut through a lot of that configuration and provide that Cadillac solution. And I don't know if maybe that's just kind of like the answer is, let vendors deal with this or let a third party come along and say like, this is my preferred view of the world. And this is how I'm going to like set it up by default. And then if you'd like that, just import my package. Right. And if you don't, go deal with it, is kind of the other side of things.
Kind of wondering, because it feels really weird having to be an application owner and interact with the API and then also have to interact with the SDK to set up and configure. I'm wondering if at a much higher level than just the Go SIG, we need a actual first-class configuration API.
We do, and it's been a long-standing question. And the most that we've said about it is that if you're going to have it, it needs to be an API. It can't just be a file format. But outside of that, no one has picked up the torch and actually done anything with like defining the API, defining what file formats are supported, defining how that's going to look. Yeah, you're not alone. I think if that's a future release of the OTel specification is defining exactly that thing that you're talking about.
So I think Aaron was asking in chat, where really is the bloat? And I think the concern is caused primarily by gRPC. Is that correct? And the desire to avoid requiring people to import gRPC just to be able to use the Otlp exporter if they want to use HTTP?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Well, it was also pulls in the protobuf libraries as well, but yeah.
Yeah, but you can't do Otlp without protobuf, can you?
No. Oh, right. So it is an HTTP as well. So never mind. Yeah, I take it back. So it is just gRPC.
I mean, I suppose you can do Otlp
JSON,
but that
the
protocol is still
protobuf
defined by
definition.
protobuf. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we use a protobuf JSON marshaller to get to that JSON. So there's no way to avoid protobuf. And if there's no way to avoid protobuf, how much is it worth jumping through hoops to avoid the gRPC import for users who are going to use Otlp?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I thought there was somebody who has posted in Slack, but just having a single one-off request from a user is not really a good metric for change. Sorry,
would it be easy to quantify how different these are? Like build a binary, like literally a binary that sends one trace through HTTP versus one trace that sends it through gRPC and like see the size difference. Because if we're talking about like a meg of difference, I probably wouldn't care. I'd say let's just stick them all in one module. If we're talking about 10 megs.
There's, as you say, there's built binary size. There's also the consideration for what winds up as direct dependencies in your go.mod file.
Yeah, I think it will be more about the Go mode file, not about the binary itself. I think that the Go build will rather scrap out the unused packages, as far as I know.
One thing.
Yeah, so I think there's been concern about version conflicts with gRPC, and users who have applications that depend on old versions of gRPC want to be able to use Otlp over HTTP, but skip the gRPC conflict. I don't know how many users there are out there like that. I don't know how important a use case that is, and I'm not sure how we quantify that. As you say, Aaron, we could easily quantify how big the binary ends up being. We can even quantify how big your go_sum file ends up being, although I think that matters a whole lot less, right? Especially if it's still constrained to the Otlp module. If you don't want Otlp, you use Jaeger or some other exporter, although Jaeger uses grpc as well. Actually, no, our Jaeger export uses Thrift, but still.
Even worse.
What about Go 117? I think, I don't know, its proposal which implemented these lazy modules. I don't know, is it affecting the go_sum as well, or just the build pipeline? Or you don't know?
I do not know.
Because I know there's a proposal, because basically this multi-module repositories is a pain in you know what for a lot of repositories, and I know there's a lazy module proposal. I think it is targeting Go 117. I'm just not sure if it's only about fetching, lazy fetching.
A runtime loading thing. Maybe I misinterpreted the name though.
But even then, we can't depend on it until Go 118 is released. So remember that's the timeline of it, right?
I see.
Well, yeah, that's also if we don't have a stable release before then. We're trying to, so that's a very long shot to say that we're going to solve our problems with Go 117.
Another angle to consider here, unfortunately involving writing yet more packages, is to consider, say that we have this kit of parts approach. You've got whatever the 9 packages or something, whatever the cross product gives you all the configurations you might want. You can put them together yourself, but maybe kind of like what Tyler was saying that a vendor might provide, maybe we provide like a common recipe package where it's got a few helper functions that construct some of what we think are the most popular combinations. So you could, like, if you imported it, you're at the risk of pulling in more bloat than you might need, because maybe that package offers, like, OTLP over gRPC, OTLP over HTTP as a fast way to put them together. But if you're really concerned with only getting the little parts that you need in your program, then you can put them together yourself.
So yes, Steve, I was actually thinking about this earlier this week, and why I suggested a configuration API is you have the problem of, if you know how to configure a thing, you have to have it imported, right? Like it has to be part of your library. And if there was something else that we could depend on as the thing that the users interact with as an application developer to do the configuration, that can separate a lot of those concerns. So what I'm, not to kind of defer this, but I want to talk with you afterwards, maybe later next week, about doing this and seeing if we could maybe come up with an idea on how that might look.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I remember I've only put one of these together so far, and I just remember the experience of being a harrowing 2.5 hours of fumbling around and being amazed when it finally worked. So I've been actually reluctant to try any other combinations. It's a dangerous part.
That's not a good thing to hear.
I'm sorry. I mean, when it all came together, it worked beautifully, but figuring out just from reading GoDoc and trying to chase references around, figuring out what I was missing was hard.
So can you tell me a little bit?
You were bit by an error that wasn't reported as well, right?
Yes.
Which
yes,
thankfully we have now fixed.
Okay.
Yeah. But hearing more about that experience may still be helpful, because though we fixed that error that I think caused you a significant time sink, there may have been other pain points that you encountered. That
some of this comes too from riding the bucking bronco of going version to version. So in other words, you have something that works, and then you edit go mod or whatever, and you bump yourself up to the next version, and you play this game of figuring out, well, where did it go? Where's that thing? Now, it moved packages, or it's split into 2 different things. And so if you're starting completely fresh, it might even be more obvious than when you're kind of distracted by this thing that used to work, and now like some of the parts have disappeared or they've moved. Tyler,
Yeah, I was.
you or did I?
I mean, it's like I write half these changes and I still am confused when it comes time to upgrading things. So I can only imagine it's even more confusing when you don't have any context.
I read the change logs both with glee and fear. You know, like if I recognize any of these names, I'm gonna have to try to follow the breadcrumbs.
So I'm just saying, like, I'm laughing right now, but after a stable release, if I'm hearing this kind of feedback, I'll be crying. Like, I really don't want that to be happening.
No, I know we're still breaking eggs. It's all right.
Hopefully we're down to the very last few eggs to break. But I think that makes it all the more important that we get something for this OTLP exporter that will be able to be stable. Because we need to get a stable release in the near term. And we need OTLP trace exports for that. Metrics, I think we've got more time, but I would also like to avoid ending up with something for traces and something else for metrics.
Yeah.
So have we thought through the idea of maybe just having a duplicate exporter in the metrics directory that's in the exporters directory, and that exporter would import the standard one and then wrap it essentially and build it up to support metrics there?
Not sure I'm following.
So in like, so if we took the existing OTLP exporter and we just ripped out all of the metrics portions of it, and we just essentially leave it as is, just with like the drivers for Grpc and HTTP, and like, but it doesn't support metrics. And then in the metrics directory, we would have a different exporter there that would wrap the OTLP exporter, and it would add on like all the export, methods to support the metrics pipeline there, and essentially be the additional exporter.
That could be used for both traces and metrics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would extend it.
And then when we stabilize metrics, we kind of invert that, move all of the metric stuff up into OTLP, leave a stub redirect in metrics for people who are using it and don't want to rewrite their paths, but suggest everybody else just start using. That's
I mean, it's kind of like
possible.
what we do with the globals, right? Like it just kind of, it isolates it, but at the same time, like we have a path forward, I guess. I don't know. It's just a thought. I don't know if Gustavus thought about this one. I'm guessing he has.
Yeah, I'm thinking that goes against the initial requisites, that we didn't change the path of the
During the
exporters.
upgrade.
Yeah.
I think it's a laudable goal to have. I'm wondering how much it's worth jumping through hoops to achieve it.
If I heard correctly, we actually weren't going to change the path during the upgrade, right, Tyler? Like we would keep the redirect around?
Yeah, I think that would be the idea, is you could keep the old path and just use it. But if you're new to the project, we could include in documentation, like, this is deprecated, start using the new one or something like that.
Yeah, so there would be definitely a way forward for people who were using the experimental path and wanted to keep using it.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm with Anthony on this one. I've been thinking a lot about like this idea. We never really wanted to do like an experimental path, but there just seems to be a lot of like hoops we're jumping through right now. So I'm thinking through it. Yeah. You can also just ignore me. That's totally valid as well.
So from the perspective that the API that the existing OTLP exporter had seemed sufficient and workable and wasn't really in need of change until we decided we wanted to explode it all and restructure it to separate metrics and traces. I think simply stripping out metrics and moving it somewhere else for the short to medium term sounds like a safer path. It's a path that's not going to change a thing that has been working for a while and people have been using for a while.
Yeah, I think so. Does anybody have an understanding of how like paths from or packages from like the Golang X repository get eventually merged into the core at all? Like, does the original remain, or is that something that like, because I was looking at like the sys package in the external repository today, and it was like just links to the standard library at this point because it's all merged in. So I don't know like if they just do a redirect maybe at like the package level or at like, you know, the code level or something like that.
It's a different package as far as I know, simply. Like a copy
Okay.
paste. Like for X error for sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, and maybe that's just the answer, is that it depends on the package. It could be a variety. Okay, but I think that I also just realized maybe Gustavo was also talking about the fact that we didn't want to change their initial import. So like what's working right now for the OTLP exporter, if you wanted to keep using metrics, you'd have to change your import path. Maybe that's what, well, and you have to change everything anyways, because you're going to like restructure how things are composed. So it's a hard problem. Okay. So Gustavo, are you even more confused now at this point as to what to do to solve this problem?
I guess so.
Okay.
You're not alone.
Yeah, I don't think you are alone either. So yeah, I think this is going to become like a more and more pressing question as to like how we make this happen. I feel like a lot of the metric stuff is at this point, it'd be ideal if we could just almost rip it out. I know every time that a test failure happens in that package, I'm like really frustrated. It still, exists in the repo, given it's something that we're trying to like not release, and it's just getting in the way at this point. But that being said, like I do think that like we want to, I don't know, there's just like this delicate balance. We talked with Josh a little while ago about trying to balance supporting the legacy stuff that we already have released, even though it was an experimental like approach, versus just ripping off the Band-Aid and throwing it in the trash and saying like metrics are no longer in this, repository after this version or something like that. Because that's the other thing, is like the OTLP is like, it's great that it supports metrics right now, but like the data model is changing, and I think in a backwards compatible way, but the API is going to just look so different that I like wonder people that are like using metrics now, it's like, like, or they wrote their own exporters or something like that. Like that's going to maybe look very, very different in the near future. I'd like to get Josh's input on this one, though. I think he's written a few things in this issue. I don't know, Gustavo, if you're talking with him somewhat regularly, or if he's somewhat dedicated to other parts.
Yeah, I can talk with him.
Okay. Maybe that's the way to progress this issue and not just stall the meeting completely, is just to say maybe we could touch base. Maybe we could set up a meeting with you guys and whoever else wants to join on this one.
So my concern is that I would like to move quickly on this because we're in mid-May. I would very much like to have an RC out this month. Ideally, we will be able to ship next week. I think we've got two outstanding issues that really need to land. One that's got a PR that's ready with a couple of changes that might need to happen, and then this one. So if there's a way forward for us that we think will be acceptable and will cover 90% of our concerns, perhaps that's the way we ought to go. And we should set a deadline for ourselves to decide one way or the other which way we're going to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things that like the thing that like when I hear these sort of things, like it's getting in the way of getting a stable release out, is that we should just take the atomic approach and just blow it all away, or we need to just isolate it and put it in its own repo, because there's a really clear partition at that point. And it's really easy to make that demarcation where we say like, oh, we found the units package. What is this doing here? Just put it into the metrics thing, like, which is what we did. And that works, right? So it's the same thing I think you could say for the OTLP, if we could do for that solution where it wraps the trace one and we just say like, okay, we'll put that in the metrics package. And I think we have paths forward here. Like, I think that there's ways to get us, you know, deprecated strategies that we've talked about and just like move forward.
I think there's also a way forward for us to declare that we've got a V2 of the OTLP exporter before we V2 anything else, right? We can have a new major version of that if 6 months down the road we realize that what we decided on still has significant problems and we need to change it, then we create a V2 of that exporter.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So would that be something that would work well if we put everything, like we split it up into the metrics directory and then the not? Is that what you're saying?
I think any path we take, that would be fine, right? Because a V2 is going to have to live in a separate import path anyways.
Okay. So is it worth doing that if we already have the added complication of the gRPC and the HTTP drivers currently? Like, Steve, I'm kind of maybe asking you, you've used, probably everyone on this call's used it, but like, is it too complex already? So that adding in this extra complexity of, you know, partitioning the metrics at a sub level of that, like, or, you know, like if we just stay with what we have right now, is that already too complex?
It was once you've got it all figured out, each of the parts makes sense. But if you're not presented with a, you know, documentation or something that says, you know, you're going to need one of these, and one of these, make your choice. It's pretty hard to figure out. Like, you're staring at it, trying to figure out what to pass as an argument, because we have a lot of interfaces, and so Go is not, unlike something like Java, Go is not great at being able to ask, oh, what are the implementations of this interface? How do I figure out which things can fit into this slot here? So unfortunately, documentation is something that, like, examples that show it is what people are going to need to look for. That doesn't answer your question directly, though, about whether or not adding metrics into the mix makes it too bad. I haven't tried to configure it with metrics, only tracing so far.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it kind of answers my question, I guess. Like, it's going to be complex no matter what.
Another way to view it is that the OTLP exporter, I think, is the only one that does traces and metrics together.
Standard out, but yeah. Right. That one's
Standard
kind
out
of
doesn't count.
Yeah, I'm with
some of
that
it,
one.
If you're willing to break the abstraction layering in documentation, you can help this a little bit. So let's say that you have a function parameter, like, you know, some sort of constructor function, and it wants an exporter. And you could say, well, the exporters really live in some other package. And in this package, all we do is we define the interface. In the documentation, you could write exporters available are blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Even though, you know, you really shouldn't have that awareness flowing in that direction, since it's only documentation. As far as the compiler is concerned, you're not violating any of the intended separation of concern there. To help direct users to say, like, if you land at this point, you're trying to figure out what to pass, your likely choices are this or that. They just happen to live elsewhere. Depends on how uneasy that makes you, you know, because it is a bit of a circular dependency. It's just, in one case, it's documentation referring to types, as opposed to an actual, you know, compile time dependency.
Yeah, my only issue would be staleness, is if that list ever came, right. That's the problem there.
Right, doesn't catch renames or anything like that.
Right, yeah, which we've never had a mistake like that in repo. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, the problem I see also with this is just like the added number of modules that we're creating in this process. And it feels like we're using modules incorrectly in some way. and in some ways we're using them correct just based on like the tools that we have.
You can definitely
So-
feel that pain when you go through package.go.dev and you go and start looking around, and it's really confusing where, like, you know some type has to live within this hierarchy, but it's, you land in one little box and then you can't figure out how to get over to the next one where, because we have many more modules than I think most projects of this size do. I don't know, maybe we're using them better than other projects do. I think it's still a young enough technology. Nobody's really sure what the right answer is long term. And recall that we're taking a principled approach rather than saying we're going to kind of try to pretend like modules don't exist, just have one. We're trying to use them to our advantage, but it's not clear yet whether or not it's hurting us more than it's helping us.
Yeah, it definitely adds some maintenance overhead. It adds some cognitive overhead in terms of needing to figure out which modules you need to put in your Go mod. Although I think IDEs help a lot with that in terms of limiting how much you need to think about that. But given that our design intent for splitting the modules so granularly was to try to minimize the dependencies that people needed to pull in any one individual piece of the SDK, where they have choices about which pieces they want to use, I think that's a good and appropriate use of modules.
I have a question. I've not used OpenTelemetry outside of Go. Does any other language offer that kind of granularity?
I mean, Java does, but that's just because everything's all packaged very neatly like that. Yeah. Trying to think of Python. I don't know.
Python has as well some pip packages. I'm not sure if it knows. I don't think it's that granular. Right now we're looking at .NET.
I think JavaScript does. JavaScript's very finely grained NPM packages.
So my thought is like when you build the final product and you look at like the nodes modules or the Python whatever the dependency chart is. If I were to go into the OpenTelemetry portion of that, I wouldn't see like the Jaeger modules from Python or the JavaScript or anything like that if I didn't actually import Jaeger.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, I know for Java,
Maybe-
that's the case.
Maybe I can quickly share my screen so I show you for .NET, which is also like RC. So this is like the main, right? TSDK, this is the API. Here there are some extensions, instrumentation, HTTP, which internally for us is in contrib, right? For Go, as far as I remember. So this is like one exporter, another exporter, and now instrumentations, everything else, and some exporter. And I haven't seen any like separation between the tracer and metrics, because I think there's already something for metrics, but I will need to check it out. I think that basically this stuff probably has also some kind of metrics included, but I will need to check it out. For sure, it's not separated here in the name that it's only for traces. Okay, stop sharing.
Yeah, I think .NET lives on the wild side, maybe a little bit.
Maybe just something to compare.
Yeah. The Java group, I know John Watson is really critical about isolation on that kind of stuff. And the star files that they're building are really specific. They put a lot of effort into that, if I remember correctly.
.NET's in an interesting spot, if I recall, as well, because the Activities API is built into the .NET framework, which is how the Otlp API is presented.
Yeah, which also means that they go on the schedule of whatever .NET's release pipeline schedule is. So it's, yeah, interesting is a good word for it. Okay, so Gustavo, can I ask, have you implemented these changes that you've set up here in this issue, or is that still something that you're thinking through, not necessarily prototyping?
I have already implemented most of them.
Oh, okay.
I just need some cleanups of duplicate code.
Okay. I think I'd like to maybe take a look at it, just look at it from like a practical standpoint, because it may not be as bad as I'm thinking. It also may be worse than I'm thinking. I don't know. It may just be helpful to look at the code at this point, because like what I'm seeing from this outline that you have here doesn't look like that bad, but I don't know. I probably just haven't thought through all of it, so it might be helpful to see a PR.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were around at the very top of the meeting where we were discussing. I think Gustavo said that his concern right now was how does he present the changes, one PR, multiple PRs, how to break them up if multiple PRs, because there are a lot of changes. Just in terms of lines.
Throw it in a draft and send it over the wire, and I don't know. If it's 10,000 lines, I guarantee I won't be able to read it. If it's 1,000 lines, there's a possibility. This is an important one. I might be able to. If it's 100 lines, that's a great size. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think starting as a draft, and then as we take a look at it, maybe we'll have some ideas about how it could be broken up as well into smaller pieces that can be reviewed more independently if that seems to be necessary. Based on stuff that's been happening in the collector, I've been having trouble reviewing code that people have written as a big, huge chunk and then tried to break up and bring in piecemeal. So I'm like, well, I see you're introducing this. What does it do? Where is it used? Why? How? For what? So that's also kind of hard to review.
Mhm.
So the other thing, like a lot of this is mostly moved and then having to rename where the function lies, right? So yeah, it might be 10,000 lines, but if most of that is in renames, is not going to be that terrible.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like Aaron's volunteering to review it, so definitely getting a draft up sounds great.
I could open a PR by tomorrow with only a exporter, for example, Otlp trace HTTP, and the things that it needs to work. I guess that would be easier to review if we should keep going with this or not.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a great option. I'll look forward to it.
I actually have time next week to dedicate to this, so.
We'll find a way to use it. You've already volunteered to help finish off the config rewrites though, so here's your first task. Okay, I think Tyler's added one more thing to the agenda. Suppose we can move on to that. You want to talk about start and end span start and end options?
Sure. Let me move this tab and share my screen really quick here. So I was talking a little bit about this last week. There's this issue that was opened and closed really quick because the span options that are passed to end, some of them just don't take effect. It's captured in a comment here, and this was specifically implemented a while ago. I think for good reason. I think there was a good reason we wanted to restructure some of the options here and just leave it open for like if another SDK wanted to actually support both start and end options that were the same instead of like the default OpenTelemetry SDK, they should be able to do that. The problem is that one, it's causing confusion. Obviously, like people don't understand like you can't pass this links thing to the span end, even though this compiles and runs. Like there's no panic. So while it can happen, like it drops it on the floor, and it's in the specification itself. It says that like links can't be added. This is actually said in the API I found when I went and looked back at it. So in some way, I actually don't know if it's valid for us to allow certain options to be passed to this end method in general, because the API says you shouldn't be doing it, and maybe we should be restricting it, which isn't necessarily how I like to define APIs, but that's not really up for me at this point because it's defined in the specification. So I'm kind of thinking we go back, and I feel really bad about that because I was the one that said we should move away from it, but I wanted to see just everyone else's opinion if they think that we should provide separate options for both end and start. I think Yana had said originally, don't do that. It's provide a little bit of friction, but if we are in the API restricted to what we can pass to the start and end, it may be a better thing and a better user experience to not say like figure it out on your own and not give them any guidance.
Yeah, I think we are. And there are things that you can't, or you probably shouldn't, I don't know if you can't provide at start that you can or should at end, like status, right? Does it make sense to provide a status at the start of a span when you haven't done anything with it? Maybe if you've already got all the information, you're just constructing the status or constructing the span.
Not sure of yourself.
Well, so yeah, I think the original reason, one of the things that was motivating me on this one was there was a user at New Relic when I was working there that was kind of pointing out that like sometimes you'll start a process early on without having things registered or without having a tracing system set up or something like that. Maybe you want to delay the creation of that span. And you can do that because we can accept a timestamp. So you can retroactively say like, well, this was actually started back then, so I'm going to like give it that retroactive timestamp. And at the same time, like you can also like, set links or something about that, like the start. I might actually go look and see what other things you can pass to the start that you can't necessarily do at the end. So like you essentially are required to do that at that point. Because if you start the span when the process starts and then you try to end it and go like, oh, by the way, I also found out that like this thing's linked later on in the process, you can't set the link at any later point in time. You do have to wait. So it was a little bit of like a frustrating thing. So essentially like you'd have to save all the state that eventually like at the end you would create and end the span at the same time essentially. But I don't know, like that sort of frustration seems like the exception rather than the general case. So I don't know, I think it was nice to be able to like say like, yeah, you could pass all this stuff, but like, I know that in New Relic, we didn't write our own SDK that accepts links, for the end method. So like, it's just the same thing. Like if that was the instrumentation, which I think I ended up not being used in the end, but like that was just getting dropped on the floor if you did provide just the end anyways. So it wasn't really a useful thing to allow that. So yeah, I agree. I think that maybe just restricting this back down to what we want is maybe what we want.
Yeah, I think that also to the extent that we'll get to the point of IDEs helping with this sort of thing, it would sure be nice if it was a type error, type match
right.
failure to say this doesn't fit here. I think even at the risk of maybe duplicating some types, or I don't know if there's something we could do with aliasing or something, but like I understand we don't want to write the code multiple times, but maybe there's something to do like marker interfaces.
You'd have different interfaces that most of the options meet both, and whether or not you, but
at the same time, like I have no problem duplicating code. Like I'll write, that's what I copy paste, right? Like I can do that, no problem. It's just the thing that I don't want is the user being confused as to what they're supposed to use, right? And I think that's what we're putting in here by doing it.
And the implementation of these,
go ahead.
The implementation of these functional options typically are one lines, right? So we're setting some links or appending some links to a list of links. We're setting the end time or start time on a span, right? So with timestamp, I think we used to have just a with timestamp, which when set as a start option would set the start time, was set as an end option would set the end time. And I think we ended up moving to separate options because we created this lifecycle thing, which we can then go back to if we have separate start and end options, right? Because then that one with timestamp could have an apply start and an apply end and an apply event methods on it, which could do subtly different things. It's setting different fields on the same struct that it's working on. So you get some consistency in the feel of the use of the option, even though it does different things and has different areas of applicability.
Yeah, that's actually something I'm thinking of. One of the reasons we did want to remove this is we had, I think, two options. One was with start time and the other one was with end time, which is, yeah, I think we could solve that problem and unify it into one of these things just fine. We don't have to have two options there.
So I do have a question. I'm looking at the span options right now, and there are three options: with link, with new root, and with span kind. And I think the only one that makes sense at the end, or am I looking at the, because I'm looking at the Otlp trace
I don't think any of those make sense at the end.
span
No,
kind.
but you have to keep in mind that the life cycle is also a span option. So
Life cycle as well.
yeah, so anything.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you pass with attributes, you can pass that as a span option. You can pass with timestamp as a span option.
Yeah, so the thing to look for would be apply span. So anything that has that apply span, which I think would add then timestamp and
Right.
attributes.
Yep. Yeah, attributes, links, the new root, and the span kind. Like none of these are actually valid for the end, except for the timestamp. That's literally what the specification says you should take as an option is the timestamp, the optional timestamp. So yeah, we could have it so that this is like, you know, apply span start and apply span end, and this could implement both, and all the other ones wouldn't. And I think we would be in the right direction here.
Do we even need to do
seems
that?
like a small
right?
change.
End, I suppose, can take attributes, right? So we could add a span end option. I think all of this, the current span options are span start.
Yeah, I actually don't know. Let me double check on that really quick. Right. So it takes these options. Trying to figure out where this actually, I think it just, yeah, it only looks at the end time is the only thing I think that it actually looks at.
Attributes, you should be able to add attributes at the end of a span too.
Well, I don't think the spec says you can, and I definitely, I'm reading the code, like it doesn't do anything with the attributes if you pass them here.
Doesn't it? No, it certainly doesn't.
Yeah, and so let me double check again, but this is what I was looking at earlier.
So you can pass with attributes as an end option, but we drop it. Is that right?
Yeah, and that was what the original argument was that like, yes, we drop that. We also drop with links. We also drop with all the other things like span kind. Yeah, new root, like you can pass them. It'll compile, it'll run, and drop it right on the floor.
I understand, like right now we have many ways to add attributes, which can be a little confusing if somebody wants to know, like, well, what's the best way? And since it doesn't really matter, it's like when you know it, say what you know. But dropping things is surely evil. You know, even if we decided, sorry, you can't do this at the end, let's prevent it with types.
Right.
Or if we can accept it and we know that it's technically feasible to incorporate the attributes at that point, then this is a bug that we should fix.
We should, yeah. Yeah, I think if the spec doesn't prevent us from setting attributes at the end, then that should be fine.
All right, does it change any interaction with span processors?
Span processors get invoked at the end of the end method, right? So if we add the attributes to the span before that, it would be no different from the user calling set attributes and then calling end.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the load there.
Yeah, because I know I have lots of code where I've got a defer written, and it calls set attributes, and then it calls span.end, where, you know, like I'm already trying to do it at the end right before I send the span off. So really, that's one way you get away without it accepting them.
Yeah, I'm with you. So there are things like this. that are a little troubling. You know, like they're just embedded in the specific thing, like specifying links. So the end method doesn't specifically say that you can't take a link, but other parts of the specification say it can't.
This is much broader than just the end method, though. This means
no, you're right.
You can't even add them after you start at any point. Whereas
any
attributes, you can add. You have to add them at start if you want them to be considered by samplers, by head samplers at least, right?
Right.
You can add them at any point after, and you can always add attributes and then end immediately. So I don't think it'll be a problem to not take attributes in end. Especially since the spec does say the only option it takes is timestamp. I think giving an option to set the status and attributes at the end would make sense, but it's not in the specs. So I would be fine also with not allowing that and requiring users to just call those methods on the span before they end it.
Well, okay. So I think that we could always add some more things to this, but I think there still is going to be the underlying question. Is like this function or this method should not accept the with links option. And currently it does.
Yes, there should be a different set of options for end than for start.
Okay. And one thing, just while we're on the topic, I want to say that if you think about this symmetrically with starting, it's also kind of silly that you can provide attributes when the span starts and then immediately set them afterward too. Right? Unless you're writing some sort of like constructor function and you want a factory function, you want to return the span as a one-liner, you know, rather than binding it to a variable, calling set attributes and then returning it or something. So I don't know.
The critical thing there though is that starting a span runs the sampler, and the sampler receives the attributes that were present at start. And so if you want attributes to be considered by a sampler, they have to be present when the span is started.
Okay, for a head sampler. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
And I've used the opposite of that. Is I know something after the span has started, actually at the very end, and I need to add attributes at the end. So
like technically you still do that, you know, you just have to call set attributes before you call end, right? It's kind of on the user to do that at that point. And maybe that's the thing, in the future we could add it, but you know, for the 1.0 release, maybe we just say like, okay, this is something you can't pass to this, you just have to do it explicitly beforehand. And then we get a bunch of users going like, this is dumb, why can't I just do this in a single line? And we go, okay, yeah, fine, we'll add it.
So Aaron, would you feel comfortable, since you said you were going to take on dealing with the trace option overhaul, would you feel comfortable rolling this into that as well and splitting out start and end span options? I think it makes sense to kind of
I'll try and slam them together and see what's working. Is there a PR that says these are the options? Can we get a list of just what options need to be present at the end specifically?
Timestamp. It's
just timestamp.
Yep.
Okay.
It's going to be a little bit complex because the functions that return the options, you need to have a unified way to return timestamp for an end option, a start option, an event option, all three of those. And so there needs to be this essentially, like, that's why you saw this life cycle option, and that needs to like roll up into one of those things. And I think that's probably just, you know, you just need to split out the span option in that to be start span option and end span option, but I would need to verify. I haven't looked into it.
So I think the way to handle that should be to have that function just return its concrete type, which implements all of the interfaces that it might be used with. Robert, I think you had mentioned before that there was some error or some issue with trying to do that, or was that something on the opposite end of trying to take a lifecycle option and extract the concrete type out of it?
Linters don't like you returning unexported types. So we'll just put in a linter.
Yeah, we can tell a linter to take a long walk off a short pier. That's fine.
Well, I don't think we need to, though. I mean, if the life cycle option is encapsulating all that and it's the return type, like we could just have it return that interface type.
But it won't be.
The things won't be accepting life cycle options.
Yeah, they'll be.
Nothing.
Right. I think if that's fine, if that's not the problem. Like, because currently right now we can already do this, right? Like we can return from with timestamp returns a lifecycle option, and you can pass that to functions that don't accept the lifecycle option. They accept some sub interface that is the composition of a lifecycle option. So right now, like the end accepts a span option, and you can pass with it a lifecycle option to it because it knows that the lifecycle option implements a span option. So it can be passed to that function. So it's that direction works. It's the other way that doesn't work.
Mhm.
If you try
So
to
the
return,
lifecycle option would exist primarily just for structuring the Go doc.
yeah, I think that's exactly why it was introduced that way. And the config structure is organized that way, yeah. And for the linting, and for the fact that there's linting, but it's also like there's practicality, right? If you're a user and you pass back this option and then you get some sort of concrete type that you can't interrogate it at all, then it's not really that can be unexpected as well.
I'll get something that works together.
Okay, sounds good. Should I assign this issue to you then?
Yeah. I'm not exactly
Okay.
sure which issue it was, but
We're about to find out. Cool. It's issue 1878. Cool.
All right.
think that's everything.
I've allowed us to run significantly over, and for that I apologize. Next week, Tyler will be back steering the ship properly, I hope, and he'll keep us on time.
Yeah, that's a pretty high bar. Thanks, everyone.
Look at
See
this
y'all
as,
next week.
as a bonus day at sea, so it was good.
Yeah, right.
Thank you all.
Bye.
See
Thanks.
ya.
Bye.